Welcome to the Story Project. True personal stories without a script, creating community one story at a time. Recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Sunwater Spa in Manitou Springs, Colorado. So please join us over the next hour for exciting, humorous, riveting, and emotional stories from some of our favorite people in the Pikes Peak region. Storyteller, trial lawyer, Dan Stageman.
I'm thinking about the concept of kids finding themselves. When you were in school, did you need to find yourself? I know I did. I looked for a good long time trying to find some version of myself that was cool. Like my brother Jack, he was cool. He was a natural athlete. He was a wrestling champion. He had a leather jacket. It was filled with tournament medals. And he'd strut around looking like some North Korean general. And I knew that he was cool because my peers, they would come to me and they'd say, "Your brother's Jack? He's cool." And then the mean ones, the mean kids would add, "Why aren't you more like him?" And that was a good question. I asked myself that many times because I was a nearsighted bookworm. I was physically awkward. I wore glasses that had these insanely thick lenses. And I was fascinated by things that interested no one else that I knew. I was a nerd, and I had no idea how to make something cool out of that clay. But when I was a senior in 1974, I read a book. It was called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And from this book, I learned two immutable truths. One, that motorcycles are awesome. And two, that the people who own, ride, and maintain motorcycles, they are very cool. I did some mathematical calculations, and I determined, as a matter of scientific fact, if I had a motorcycle, I could be cool. I answered an ad in the local paper for a used Honda 160 Dream. Now, the 160 Dream was a small bike, very underpowered, but I remember looking at that thing and thinking, that is a sleek black freedom machine. And I swung my leg over it and I sat on it and oh man, this thing was made for me. And I reached forward and I turned the key and I heard music. It was a song that went and I reached up to the handlebars and I turned the throttle and the song changed to all of that power from a flick of my wrist. I got on that thing, I took it for a test drive, and of course I thought of Easy Rider. But then I thought of Steve McQueen jumping over Swiss border fences in The Great Escape. And I thought, yeah, this motorcycle, it could be my great escape. I went back to the seller. I gave him every penny he asked for, and I rode it home. Now, home at the time was a tiny little farmhouse perched on a hill in an isolated part of southwest Iowa. And it had a long gravel drive. And when I turned up that drive, I saw my mother. She was in the yard on the hill on all fours. She'd been pulling weeds. Her head turned at the sound of the motorcycle. She didn't know I bought this thing. And as I pulled up, her head kept turning. And until she had to stand to follow my progress up the drive. And I got to the top of the drive, and I turned off the motorcycle. I hit the kickstand. I swung my leg over it. I walked around the bike towards my mother, She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at that bike. She had a pinched expression. It was a look I'd seen before. She had just found mouse droppings in the silverware drawer. I got up next to her, and she finally looked at me, but she pointed at that bike. She said, "What is that?" "Oh, that's a motorcycle." "Where did it come from?" I just bought it." And she shook her head with her hands on her hip. She said, "Don't you know those things are dangerous? Don't you know you could be hurt? Don't you know you could be killed on that thing?" I knew that the next words out of my mouth could determine whether I finished high school as a lonely nerd or as an ultra-cool motorcyclist. I summoned the greatest philosopher of that day, Arthur Fonzarelli. And I looked at my mother through my Coke bottle glasses, and I said, "Well, Mom, I guess then I'll live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse." Surprisingly, she smiled a little at that. And I finished high school commuting on that bike. And then when school ended and I graduated, I got a summer job in West Omaha. Every day, I would ride that bike 30 or 40 miles to the yellow freight truck dock. I'd get there at 5 p.m. and I'd unload trucks at 1 a.m. I'd been doing that for just a couple of weeks when my brother said he'd just gotten work at the Warehouse Bar in Council Bluffs. He said, if I got there by last call at 1:45, he would get me in and he'd get me a beer. I didn't even like to drink. I said, I'll be there in time for 2 beers. And so that morning at 1:05 a.m., I'm on my little motorcycle. We're on Interstate 80. We're pointed east. We're going as fast as that bike can carry me, which is only about 70 miles per hour. But this is the day of the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. So the few cars on the road, they didn't know I was there until a blur roared past them. Up ahead, I see a constellation of 4 orange lights. It's a semi-truck. It's headed for the Iowa border. And just before the Iowa border, there's a steep bank curve where the speed limit slows to 45. But I know I can take that turn at 70 if I have both lanes to work with. I have to get in front of the semi. And so I will that motorcycle to go faster. And as I near the truck and I'm closing fast, I shift my weight and I move into the left lane. But as I do, I see a red flashing light. And the truck is moving into my lane. And now I'm panicking because I'm going too fast. I'm far too close to stop. I realize, no, I just have to shift my weight again, move into the right lane, pass it there. And so that's what I do. I get into the right lane. And that's when I see what I should have known I was going to see. But it's a complete surprise to me when I see the pickup truck that semi was passing. And now there is no time to think, but it's as if that motorcycle knows that there's only one possible escape route, and that is through that gap between the 2 trucks. And it finds that path, and it speeds forward. But as it does, I am no longer on that motorcycle. I am floating in the air. I'm floating in the air, and it's absolutely quiet. I hear nothing. But I see everything. I see the motorcycle with my own body on it, and the trucks, and they're all going in slow motion. It's as if the motorcycle is just inching through that gap. And I can see with 20/20 clarity that the space between my left handlebar and that semi-truck is maybe a 1/4 of an inch. And between the right handlebar and that pickup truck, man, you would need a micrometer to measure that space. But I am not afraid. I feel perfectly at peace with whatever is going to happen. And miraculously, what happens is that motorcycle makes it through that gap. And when it does, I find myself back in my body. And now I can hear everything. I can hear the wind, the motorcycle, the truck. I can hear that trucker. He is talking to me. He is saying to me through his air horn that I am a moron. Moron. And that ear-piercing blast, it is like a beautiful celebration of life to me, and I am filled with this adrenaline-charged euphoria. It drives me to my feet, and I stand on the pegs, and I am compelled to scream an animal scream until I have no air left in my lungs, and then I sit down, and when I do, my knees are beating that gas tank like a drum, and I'm starting to lose control of my arms. They're shaking. My whole body is trembling like I'm freezing to death. And I have my first conscious thought since leaving my body. And it is, I have to get off of this highway. I have to get off this motorcycle right now, or I'm going to die. And there, just when I need it, there's an exit ramp, and I take it. And it leads to a gravel road. I take a left on that gravel road. I'm going 6, maybe 7 miles an hour when that gravel road becomes a dirt road, and it had rained earlier that evening, so the dirt is mud, and the mud reaches up and it grabs that front wheel, and the motorcycle goes down, and I go down with it. So I'm laying on the side of the road in wet grass on my back, blinking up at the star, and I'm thinking, did that really happen? Did I leave my body? And that's crazy. That's insane. That's comic book stuff. But I was there. I saw it. I was in the air looking down at myself. But these are crazy thoughts and crazy emotions, and my dream is in the mud, in the middle of the road, in the middle of the night. I have to get it up. I have to ride it out of there. And so that's what I do. I get on it. And I'm sure not getting back on that interstate that night. So I find a paved street, and I just follow, and it takes me into Council Bluffs, of all places, to the Warehouse Bar. And there, I see welcoming, warm neon lights. And I can hear from an open window the glorious sound of rock and roll and the laughter of young people having a real good time. I know my brother is in there. He's expecting me. And I've got a story to tell. I keep riding until I get home. And when I get home, I park the bike by the basement door, and I go in that basement door through our partially finished basement to my little bedroom. And I take a book off the dresser. It's one I started the day before. It's Kurt Vonnegut's Breakfast of Champions. And I go and I lay in bed, still fully clothed, and I look up at the floor joist. There was no ceiling. And I just think, it's Friday night, and I'm home alone again, reading a book. But it's a really cool book.
That was so awesome.
Hi, I'm Jake Brownell. You tune in to